Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary, where today we continue working on our Vampire Survivors clone featuring Candy. The last time we continued our endeavor of recreating weapons from Vampire Survivors in our clone. Some of them resemble the originals quite well, and others are going to need some tweaking. The difficulty of figuring out just how weapons work is definitely taking its toll, but we soldier on with the addition of even more weapons. The first addition this session is the combo of 8 the Sparrow and Fiera der Tafello. And since both behave very similarly, we could use these same functions and structures. Using our projectile system established last episode, projectiles are spawned 90 degrees apart, starting at 45 degrees. There's also a slight offset applied to each bullet to give the attack some variety. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing special about the projectiles for these weapons other than their look. The results felt pretty on point, although to preserve my sanity, I've decided not to focus too heavily on the replication aspect. We'll continue to clone the best that we can, but it's also okay to accept that it won't be exact. And so with that understanding, let's move on to the next weapon. The Cherry Bomb is yet again another projectile that uses our projectile setup for the struct. And like those before it, the behavior is all in the projectile object itself. Cherry bombs have 2 states. Their initial state treats the projectile like any other generic projectile. Then, based on chance, which will be altered to work with the luck stat later, may make it explode, which sets it to the second state. The second state creates a collision circle which damages any enemies who walk within radius. The cherry bomb is then despawned once its lifespan has ended. And for now, these states are drawn as a cherry bomb during the initial state and a circle the size of the explosion radius for the second. This will obviously be changed later, but for now, worked as our version of the cherry bomb weapon. Up next was the Song of Mana, which needed its own custom code. It uses a similar setup to other area-based attacks, but this time creating a collision rectangle the size of the attack. And because Song of Mana also uses a similar damage cooldown system to weapons like the Garlic, it too uses our global array system to keep track of enemies already damaged. Now apparently the attack is meant to be more of an ellipses, but a rectangle just felt right. We can always switch it to an ellipses later if it really makes that big of a difference. But for now, a box displaying said collision rectangle worked, and so it was on to the next addition. The final addition this session were the duo of Birdies, Peachone, and Ebony Wings. These birdies were a little complicated and required their own specific arrays. The actual spawning of the projectiles isn't anything too crazy. However, the target, the moving circle that follows the player, needed to be maintained, which is why they needed their own arrays. Since only 1 entry per weapon can be made, each array corresponds to their specific weapon. These arrays update the X and Y positions of those target circles in relation to the player's position. The reason these arrays aren't in the struct can be found in the projectile object. An active boolean has been added to the projectile, and much like the cherry bomb, these avian summoned projectiles are broken into 2 states. The first state is that weird arc thing it does before moving towards their designated target. The second state is the actual attack state, which is where the projectile becomes active and can damage the enemies, all of which is achieved by constantly updating the projectile's target angles and speeds. And so in order for the projectiles to move towards their proper destinations for each weapon, this is where those arrays come into play. And as much as I'm not trying to compare, it's clear that this is not exactly the same thing as seen in Vampire Survivors. I mean, it's similar enough that it's generally passable, but perhaps with more tweaking we can close that gap between differences. All in all, I wanted to tackle some of the newer weapons being added. Unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of time recently to really play and get familiar with the latest additions being made. And yes, that goes as far back as the Cherry Bomb, which feels like it was added like an eternity at this point. So moving forward, it's gonna be a bit more difficult to really nail the feel of these weapons on the first go. However, we're in no rush, so tweaks should, as I said earlier, close that gap of differences. Or we'll just give up and make them our own. Either way, this was fun, especially trying to tie multiple weapons to similar code when necessary. This really has me thinking of other ways that we could further simplify the code, but that's for another time. For now, this brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary. So if you enjoyed today's entry, consider leaving a like. Be sure to also subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already, and let me know what you think of today's progress. How can we improve the weapons that we added today? Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.